George, and I guess Richard wanted him to officiate. Is that the right word? Officiate the...
Yeah, that would be about right.
And I guess he told Will this, and Will had told Howard, but it was news to George.
Right.
And George is such a sweet guy. Just he would do anything for anybody here. He is one of the family. But Howard wasn't too pleased about that coming up, although Richard and George do have a personal relationship. But that bled over to what happened with Steve Langford, where I guess his daughter interviewed George for some kind of project. And Howard drew the line. He's like, I don't want people bothering the guests. And where was he going with that, one, Gary? And two, why didn't Steve Langford come in and defend himself?
Well, the first part, Howard has always said, I don't want people bothering the guests, and it doesn't matter how high or low you are on the food chain. You know, I remember the first, like, Howard would say, I don't want people taking pictures with the guests. I want guests to be able to come up here and not be asked for autograph, not be asked for pictures. And then there was a weird thing going on where Jackie would have the day's guest autograph one of Jackie's jokes, and we put a stop to that. And then it was, you know, everything from, Grillo calling Sherry Lansing looking to get acting work to, you know, John talking to stockbrokers, and Howard's just like, leave my people alone. So, I mean, it's sort of the rule. Don't bother people who are on the show and ask them for favors.
But sometimes I guess you cultivate personal relationships with the people who are on the show. And Howard could look at it and say, everybody you basically talk to, you specifically, Gary, is as a result of him.
You know, like everything on the show, because people call and complain all the time, there's hard and fast rules, except there's different rules for everybody on the show. So I'm sure there's more latitude for Robin being friendly with a guest outside the show than there would be for, say, Jason. But, you know, as a general rule, Howard doesn't like the guest being bothered. Howard feels everything's a bother. So he feels like when you ask somebody something that it's a bother to them. And listen, it's his show. It's totally his prerogative. And maybe it is a bother. Like, maybe George is too nice a guy to say, I really don't want to do that.
Do you think Steve made a mistake not coming in today?
Huge, huge tactical error on Steve's part.
Why is that?
Because he paints everybody into a corner and explains to you why they have to answer his questions. Steve should have come in and just sort of said, hey, I agree with you, I made a mistake, or I disagree with you, and here's my argument. But how is what Howard was saying about Steve Langford any different than the argument between Steve Brandano, Steve the intern for the purposes of this, so everyone remembers. Remember Steve Brandano went to an event and his girlfriend at the time was there and he said he didn't want her interviewed.
That's right.
And Langford goes, it's part of the story. What's the difference?
And, well, another thing about that, Howard wasn't looking to talk to Steve's daughter or family there. He wanted to talk to Steve. And I guess when family comes up, all of a sudden you want to sort of change things.
What happens is when you have a big sensitivity to it, it's at that moment you have to decide whether you're going to go in or not, and then you sort of dig in and hold your ground. And, you know, Steve's got to come in sooner or later.
How did he react when you went back to get him?
I called Steve. Jason called Brad, and he said, "Yeah, Steve's here." So I said on the microphone, "Steve will be here any minute." And then all of a sudden I noticed it's a 30-second walk over here. So a minute and a half went by, and I said something's wrong. So I got up out of my chair and I walked over there, and I said to Brad, "What's going on?" He goes, "He's not coming in." And I'm like, "What?" I couldn't believe it because it's just not Langford. So I walked over, and Langford put up his hand and he said, "Listen, his daughters are off limits. My daughter's off limits." And I was like, "But Steve," and he's just like, he didn't want to hear it. So I just came back and reported it because I figured I'll let Howard handle it tomorrow.
Well, like you said, eventually he's coming in anyway. So now, I mean, does it make him a hypocrite?
Yeah, I think it does. I really do. I like the guy. I can like a guy. And I think his news stories are amazing. But yeah, it's a hypocritical of him not to show up today on this count.
Do you think he made a mistake, Benji?
Yeah, I think if he had come in initially and just said, you know what, there's two things that could have sort of covered it. He could have just apologized and said, yeah, you know what, I did go, it probably would have been better to approach this a different way. I can understand his, that whole gray area when you develop a little bit of a personal relationship.
But that's a different discussion than this is about my kids.
Right. Or if he had made it something for the show, which I thought maybe that's what it was. I thought maybe he had his daughter interview George, but was going to make it into a bit for the show.
I don't think that's it.
No, well, obviously it's not if it can't be discussed. So I don't remember what the question was.
All right, let's take some calls on this. Tyrone, you're on the wrap-up show.
Hey, guys. Let me do the quick little preface. Gary, big fan, read your book the first week it came out on one Saturday. Great book, the whole deal.
Thank you.
That being said, I'm going to kind of combine two Malcolm Gladwell points. Did you kind of reach your tipping point or take your 10,000 hours of just shit and now you're just kind of over it? Because there's just like a hardness, just kind of a dismissive, I don't want to get as far as the arrogance, but it's like you've graduated from being a kind of the John Heine, nice, touchy-feely, good guy, just kind of take it and just dismiss it as being part of the show, and you're kind of the lovable, laughable, to where you're now into kind of that Howard, Robin realm where you're a little more like, fuck you, don't talk to me like that, I pull rank, I'm a little higher in the food chain, and to kind of acknowledge your value with the show.
I don't think either one of those things is true. I think I have gotten to the point where, like on a day like today when the guy Craig was goofing on me, I figured he was just going for the joke. But at some, maybe I've been just doing it so long that I just get sick and tired of being the easy shot. You know what I mean? The easy target. And that doesn't mean I forgot my 10,000 hours, and it doesn't mean I'm pulling rank. It means at some point you just get sick of taking a lot of shit.
That's what I'm saying. But now it seems like it's kind of that's your line now. It's like, but recently, and I know I'm probably not the first person to say this, but you just kind of, it's almost like you just had it. Kind of like almost like in a marriage where your wife just kind of gets over it, and it's like, and she doesn't take any shit anymore. I mean, even like when you were like with Ronnie last week, Ronnie said something, and you're like, yeah, I can't believe that I forget the way you articulate it, but you're like, I can't believe a driver is going to talk to the producer of the show like that.
Yeah, you know what?
Like,
that was just a flat out joke that I think Sal or Richard fed me. That was funny to say to break Ronnie's balls. I didn't really feel that way. And with Ronnie, it didn't bother me at all. That was one of those things that rolled right down my back. But sometimes I do feel like, like Benji sort of says, the character's been created. It's the easy shot to take, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm sure with your kids getting older and becoming more aware and everything that's going on.
It's not even, Ryan, it's not even that. It's not even like my kids know about it, or it's not like they listen to the show and there's any embarrassment factor or anything. And every day's a different day. Some days it's, it's like everything here. Some days it's funny and you laugh along with it, and some days it's just like, oh, enough of the shit. I think it's with anything.
I don't know if this is if it would have evolved this way anyway, but I would also think, like, you kind of have your own forum now with, like, the wrap-up show. And there's, like, with the news department, you can get the word out other ways, which sort of gives you a way to, like, get, to say your point of view back, which sort of in a way makes you stronger overall.
I don't even know. I haven't thought it out like that. I just think that sometimes you just sort of like, on the 30th anniversary of being the butt of the joke, some days it's not as funny as it was 30 years ago when it was more exciting to me. So I think at the beginning, I was so excited to be on the radio that I didn't care about being the butt of the joke. And I'm not saying that I'm above it, but some days it just bothers you, and you can't control that.
I think, Benji, what you just said is true. I think having that forum and being able to express yourself on other shows on the channel helps. But I've noticed since we've been here, you definitely fight back a lot more than you did even at K-Rock.
And I think it's funny that some people like to turn that into like, oh, Gary's full of himself now because he fights back. But at some point, other people could be like, Gary's a big wimp. He just takes shit all the time. So you can't please everybody. So I just do what I feel.
But and I think it's also a little bit like at this point, and maybe that started happening at K-Rock, you're like a tenured professor. Like, Howard lets you do it. He gives you some freedom to fight back, and you're not going to get fired for fighting back.
Well, listen, it was different. If I wouldn't have fought back probably in the first 10 years that I was here. Then when I fought back after that, there was probably some, it was all good natured, but some days you do get mad, and you do. Howard lets you fight back here. There's no doubt about it. That's one of the great things. He'll give you the opportunity, but you have to realize if you fight back, he's going to fight back, and you're fighting with a sharpshooter, a marksman, a professional.
Rich in Pennsylvania, welcome to the wrap up show.
Hi guys. Hey, I want to talk about Langford. Gary, I think you're right. He's lost all credibility. Now when he comes in, what he did to Jenks, painting him into the corner, all Jenks has to do, all any of you all have to do from now on is say, let's talk about your daughter interviewing George. And he's got no credibility, none whatsoever anymore. He just wussed out like a big puss.
I want to know how old he is. I want to see his birth certificate.
I don't care how old he is. He acted like a 4-year-old. Oh, you can't talk about that. He talks about everybody else's problems. Even after they tell him not to, he'll go right in after it. So
I think it's going to end up being one of those things where he even now, if he's listening to this, he probably thinks to himself, you know what, I should have just gone in and dealt with it because it's just gotten bigger than it has to be.
Well, guys, when he starts, It's going to happen. He's going to bust somebody's balls on something. And it's going to come before Howard, him, and whoever. And I can just hear it. I can hear it's almost like you can write the dialogue. He's going to be busting on you. Hey, let's talk about George, your daughter, in the interview. I can hear it coming.
I don't think Howard's going to press him too much about it tomorrow. But you're right that other people probably will.
Well, it's a guy who seems Teflon that's now exposed a sensitivity, and when people want to fight, that's what you go for.
And maybe he was hoping that, okay, I'll sit back, Howard will blast me on the air right now, a day passes, it blows over, it's not as big of a deal, Howard's ready to move on to the next thing, so the damage is a lot less.
Or he'll get rid of his daughter.
Well, that's not going to happen, but I do think, I forgot which one of you guys said it, though, a lot of people are going to definitely keep this bullet and wait,
right,
and they're going to use it when they get the chance. Thanks for calling in there, Rich. Eddie in Pennsylvania, you're on the wrap-up show. Hey, Eddie.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hello, yes. I just want to voice some support for Steve Langford. I think Howard should have called him aside after the show and found out the whole deal with family. I agree with Steve. If Howard's kids are off limits, so is Langford's daughter till he knows exactly the circumstances.
But we know what the deal is. There's nothing special in there, and we weren't going to talk about. Howard wasn't going to ask him anything about his kid except to say to Steve. In other words, without going into Steve's family life, I'm pretty sure his daughter didn't say, "Oh, I'm a huge George Takei fan. Let me interview him for my school project." So Howard probably would have explored how did that come up and why were you getting involved in it, and that has nothing to do with his daughter.
I just think, to me, it's just the father doing something he could for his kid. If he did overstep his bounds, I would have approached him first because it involved a child myself.
But okay, but that's a great. But that discussion can be had on the air without bringing the daughter into it in any way that's going to expose any more than what we already know.
And Eddie, I also think if Steve hadn't had the track record of talking to different people on the show with different circumstances, this wouldn't be as big of a deal. But that's not the way it is.
Yeah, and I said to Howard. Howard said, "How did this?" We talked about this during the because Will did the notes. And Howard goes, how did Langford even get to him? And I said, I think he spent a week with him, traveling around with George. I'm sure they developed some sort of friendship, but Howard wasn't, he wouldn't buy in that.
All right. Thank you, Eddie. Jenks, you're on the wrap-up show.
Hey, good morning, guys. It's Jenks. This whole Langford thing, I talked to him back in his office, and he said he doesn't answer to Howard. Okay? I'm trying to figure out where he gets off saying that. How does he get off not answering to Howard on this issue? He gives it to everybody else, but when it's his turn to get it, he doesn't take it.
Jenks, don't you, Gary? Steve is scheduled to do the news update tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Okay, he'll answer to Howard tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I'm going to call in tomorrow and to remind Howard to ask Steve Langford about this, and I encourage anybody who's listening to the show to call in and ask Howard to remind Steve Langford about this.
By the way, so Steve will sit and talk to you on the phone?
Yes. Well, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. But I called mercilessly this morning because I knew that he had to go in the studio, and he finally did answer, and he said he doesn't answer to Howard. I don't answer to Howard.
Here's the problem for Steve. Jenks, how many times did you call me or email me this morning with suggestions about how this should be handled?
Probably 10 or 20.
Exactly. The first email was, at one point, the first email was, this is bullshit. The second one is, you better get Langford in. The third one is, Langford has to come in and repeat. Then it was a phone message, and there were more emails, and that's just Jenks.
Gary, I was really upset, man. I was furious.
I could tell.
How does he get away with this?
Well, Jenks.
Wait. Are you upset about what he's accused of doing, which he said getting the interview, or are you upset that he wouldn't talk to Howard?
No, you figure it this way. When Langford calls somebody on the carpet with a news story, okay, they are expected to come in and answer to Howard for it or talk about it to Howard. How does Langford get to put his hand up and say, point taken? What if everybody did that every time Langford wanted to interview them?
But people
put
can't.
their hand up and said,
No, but
Jenks, you make a very fair point. You're going to get your answer tomorrow morning.
But I will tell you that when you put your hand up and say point taken, it doesn't necessarily. I turned around, but he doesn't.
Absolutely, but it was Howard's choice then whether or not to stop. Howard could have pressed him on.
Most of it had to do with the fact that Chris Rock was coming in.
Right.